Hi, I'm Jen Ford, coming to you today from Toohey Forest, which is right in the heart of Meanjin or Brisbane in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of where we're coming to you today from, the Yuggera and Turrbal people, and I'd also like to acknowledge any First Nations people that might be watching this from around the world. I've been doing restoration for 30 years, so I've worked in ecosystems like this, but equally I've worked heaps in subtropical rainforest, dry rainforest, coastal systems from islands and dune systems and salt marsh and mangrove, quite a range of different ecosystems along the whole east coast of Australia, and have been lucky enough to work with nature applying assisted natural regeneration over the last 30 years. And nature's really where I've gained my most valuable lessons. Assisted natural regeneration, or ANR, has always featured in my work over the last 30 years. Really from the start of working in old growth but very, very degraded remnants, where there was exotic vegetation or non-native vegetation every single layer. You know, we had really limited funding and no guarantee of any funding, so ANR was a really good way to progress ecosystem recovery with a little bit less risk, to be honest, because often when you plant a tree or do something, it still needs many, many years of follow-up weed control and support for it to be able to fulfill our goals. And we've been able to use that and still use it today because it's heaps cheaper. We get much better results, and whilst it might be slow to start with in that first year or two, the growth rates of something that has naturally regenerated compared to, say, something that was planted, the differences are extraordinary. And so the way that ecosystems develop and through their successional stages, we've not only learned a lot about how to apply ANR and where it might work, but we're also really testing those boundaries and getting results away from existing vegetation and away from remnants. We're getting it in regrowth in some really degraded areas that might be dominated by weeds and exotic vegetation. So it's a huge part of my work because it now allows us to do things at scale. So we can focus the more expensive, resource-hungry activities like planting into the areas that really need it. Assisted natural regeneration, where it works really well is where there's already some existing structure. It doesn't always have to be local or native vegetation. Sometimes exotic vegetation or non-native vegetation might be mimicking what should be there. So having some structure, some remnant or regrowth vegetation definitely helps having some ANR outcomes, but equally working near some of those ecosystems or where you think seed or propagules may have come onto the area that you're doing via, maybe it's the guts of flying foxes or birds, maybe it's through wind dispersal, maybe it's through creek and water dispersal, gravity, humans or other mammals. And it might not always be evident because perhaps there's, I don't know, some cattle or goats grazing there or agricultural impacts through clearing or some sort of other degrading factor, but doesn't mean that there's not capacity for recovery. Give it some time. Sometimes it might take 1 to 2 years, but it's about supporting that in the interim. ANR is a wonderful approach and you get success in more areas than you don't, but it's not always going to be successful. If you've got a site that is eroding and your soil is not stable and it's heading down the hill or down the river system or somewhere else, there's a real lack of a soil seed bank, so you're probably not going to get the success that you need. If there has been really, really long-term impacts from clearing and subsequent agriculture, and again, the soil seed bank is unlikely to have much seed left in it, you might need to plant. It doesn't mean you need to plant every single thing, it might just need a kickstart. It might also be the case that you're wanting to protect or look after certain threatened species. Perhaps it's a significant cultural area and part of its protection is to ensure that there's vegetation around it and you might need a quicker fix. It also can be difficult to persuade people that ANR actually works. And that's really hard when someone's looking at it and going, well, it looks really degraded and it's covered in non-native vegetation and I don't think you can do it, we're going to have to plant. Funny to note though is ANR can be successful in quite weedy looking areas. It's sometimes about giving it enough time and controlling the other weeds or controlling the other issues. Maybe it's inappropriate fire that's coming onto your site. Maybe it's livestock that are impacting your site and keeping them out and then controlling that competition. But if you have not been able to get back in time, the weeds are again going to overtake those natives. And it's at that point that we start to waste resources. We can waste human resources, we waste financial resources, and we waste nature's resources, because if we get to a point where those weeds have again overtaken those natives, we have lost the benefits of the soil seed bank. So timing is critical, and sometimes that's a real challenge. But give it some time. You know, sometimes it might take 1 to 2 years, but it's about supporting that in the interim. Take the time to assess and understand your site and really whether you think it's got that capacity. A bit more time at the front end can mean huge results at the back end. When I first started learning, there was a philosophy around minimal disturbance. It was so not the case. We started ripping compacted soil near remnants and just got the most phenomenal results, like doing the opposite, trying to get things going, simulating a storm and movement of soil and putting light in where it was already shaded by lots of dense weeds, so the pioneer species were started germinating and growing and doing the things that they're supposed to do. Because sometimes that can be a way of reactivating things. So think about the natural disturbance and how you as a practitioner can use that to your advantage. The key thing is follow up, follow up, follow up, follow up. And timing. I mean, at the end of the day, the more you work your site, no one's going to know that site better than you. I would also say that wait for some of those results. So for instance, if you have cleared a lot of non-native plants to see if you've got a soil seed bank that's active or that you're going to get some level of recovery, give it some time. But the key is managing those weeds in the interim, managing the competition. So keeping the livestock out, trying to manage fire properly in the landscape. All of those threats, they still need to be managed in that process, but give your site time to recover. And then if it hasn't, after a certain period, maybe it's 2-3 years, then you can plant and you haven't lost anything. The use of good before and after photos has really assisted demonstrating to people what's possible, really showing them the changes in the health of a site. Developing case studies is a really good way of demonstrating to people what's possible. Utilising technology, whether that's aerial photography and showing the recovery of landscapes. I would also, and I had done this a little bit more in my earlier career, but work with academics. Work with people that can scientifically monitor your site. Often practitioners don't have enough time for this, but we can work with other people that do this, and so there is evidence in what you're doing. There are the ecological outcomes, like incredible recovery of biodiversity on sites and even within whole areas. On individual sites, the recovery of diversity of plants, of critters, of that health of the ecosystem. You can even see how restoring one site has assisted the recovery of areas nearby. You can see over decades the movement of vegetation down whole hillsides because the top of the site had been recovered, or even downstream. And on a social level, I've just seen so much shift in the way that community groups that are focused on restoration, private landholders that are restoring land for ecological benefits, and where they have applied ANR and facilitated natural regeneration, and them seeing the results and them talking about and sharing their experiences and how that has created momentum. And to see sites recover and then, you know, become twice their size because they've spilled out past the boundaries of their site, it's just been extraordinary. I think looking recently at some aerial maps to see the changes in sites over the last 20 years in some quite populated areas is just extraordinarily fulfilling.